Hi all, welcome to Codification. With this video, we are starting a playlist of tutorials explaining how to incorporate Syncfusion components into an ASP.NET Core MVC project. Some of the components have already been discussed in one of our previous videos where we have built an expense tracker application from scratch. Currently, I have uploaded clips from the same tutorial. In future, more videos showing other helpful Syncfusion components will be added to this playlist. In this first part, we'll be showing how to configure a fresh brand new ASP.NET Core MVC project for Syncfusion component library. The main agenda behind this tutorial is to learn developing an enterprise web application in ASP.NET Core. In this application, I have used feature-rich components like form controls, grid, chart elements, navigational controls, etc. from Syncfusion component library. It's free and one of the most favorite component library among .NET developers. These components helps us to focus on the domain of the project rather than implementing inevitable features of the controls or components from scratch. I'm sure you will agree with me once you develop the application along with this video. So please watch till the end of this tutorial. Since this tutorial is lengthy, feel free to change the speed of the video from this option here, or you could use these shortcuts to increase or decrease the playback speed. So here is my Visual Studio 2022. Let's create a new project. Now I will select this template here, ASP.NET Core Web App for MVC. You can easily find this template if you select C# from the first drop-down and Web from the last. Now select the template, click on Next. I will name this project as Expense Tracker. Now let's save the project here. For this project, I'm using the framework .NET 6. Since we are doing this project for a demonstration purpose, I will uncheck this option for HTTPS. Now click on Create. So here we have the brand new ASP.NET Core MVC application. Now before going forward, I have a suggestion for ASP.NET Core beginners. If you have not implemented the basic CRUD operations like insert, update or delete, I highly recommend my previous video where I have explained the basics of ASP.NET Core and implemented the basic CRUD operations with all the details. Link is there in video description and inside the iCard top right corner. If you already know these basics, you are fine. You can easily follow this tutorial. The main agenda behind this tutorial is to get familiar with the components that is required for building a big enterprise application. So without further ado, let's get started with creating models for this application. Before that, let's install required NuGet packages for Entity Framework Core. For that, you can right click on these dependencies here, then select Manage NuGet Packages. Then from this Browse tab here, search for Entity Framework Core. So here we have the basic package, Microsoft Entity Framework Core. Now from this version drop down here, select the same version as that of the ASP.NET Core that we have inside this project. You can see that inside the Solution Explorer. Just expand these dependencies. So here we have the ASP.NET Core framework. Right click on it, then go to Properties. Whatever the version number here, select the same version number for the NuGet package. So just select the version here, click on Install. Now for this project, we'll be using SQL Server database. So we have to install this package here, Entity Framework Core SQL Server. Now select the same version and then install. Now here we have the final package, Entity Framework Core Tools. Select the same version, click on Install. Now we have done with the installation of required packages. Now let's create model classes for required entities. So the first one is category. For example, salary, medicine, fuel, gadgets, etc. and etc. And then we have the transaction model itself, which is to feed the transactions that we have made in various expense categories in past days. So let's add those two entities as a model here. So add class, category. First of all, we have the primary key itself, category ID. We want this key as a primary key, so I will add this attribute here, key. Now we have to add the corresponding namespace. For that, you can use this shortcut, hold Control, then press period or dot simple. Now select this using statement here. After that, we have the title, then icon, meaning for each category, we will be having an emoji icon to easily identify the category. So here is the property icon. Finally, the type of the category, meaning whether it is income or expense. Now for these string properties here, it is necessary to specify the corresponding SQL Server data type. For that, we can make use of this attribute column Now let's add the corresponding namespace. You can use the shortcut, hold Control, then press period, type name invoker 50. Now let's do the same for these two properties here. In my Visual Studio here, you could see a green squiggly line. It's a warning indicating these properties are not nullable, hence they must be initialized within a constructor of this class. In order to disable this warning, just hover the mouse on any of these properties, then expand this icon and then go through these options just to silence this warning here. Now let's create one more model for transaction. First of all, we have the primary key itself, which is transaction ID. In order to specify the property as a primary key, we can add this attribute key. Now in this transaction entity, we have to save the category ID, which is the ID of the record from this category entity here, in order to specify which type of transaction that we are dealing with. That will be done with a foreign key, so I will explain that in a bit. Now after category ID, we have the transaction amount. Then we have a string property not in order to specify the description of this transaction if there is any, which is not mandatory, so I will specify the data type as nullable string. Now finally we have the transaction date, so here it is date time as date. Now let's specify the default date like this date time dot now, which is the current date. Like this default value, I have to specify the default value for the category icon as an empty string. And then here we have the type property specifying whether we are dealing with an expense or income. So by default, we will specify it as expense, because most of the transactions will be of the type expense in a day-to-day life. Now back to this transaction model here. Now let's specify the category ID. We just need to save the category ID inside this entity. For that, we could do this. We will be having a property of the type int as category ID, which is exactly what we have inside this category model here. See? Which is the primary key of this category entity. Now in order to keep the integrity of the data that we are going to save, we need a foreign key relation between these two tables based on this property category ID. Meaning we can't save a transaction when its category ID is not present inside the base table category here. Now in order to specify the foreign key, we just need to use a navigational property with the same exact name as that of this entity category here. Here we have the navigational property of the type category model, and we will name this property as category itself. So this is how we specify foreign keys between two entities in an entity framework core. There are other ways to create foreign keys, but in this situation, this navigational property is more suitable. Since this is a navigational property, when we create the actual DB through migration, there will not be a column corresponding to this. We have discussed the same in one of my previous tutorial about master detailed CRUD operations in ASP.NET Core. Related links are given in video description. Now finally, let's specify the data type for this string property like we have done inside this category here. So let me copy paste this column attribute. Let's add the corresponding using statement. So here we have defined the entity framework core models. Now let's specify the DB context for entity framework. That let's create a new class here called application DB context. First of all, we have to inherit this from the entity framework core base class DB context. Let's add the corresponding using statement. Now let's add a constructor here. Now during DB migration, these entity model classes here will be converted to corresponding SQL Server tables. It will only happen if there is a property corresponding to these two model classes inside this DB application DB context class here. For that, you can add a property of the type DBSet, which is of the type transaction model. Let's name this property as transactions. Now let me copy paste this property for the category. This DBSet is of the type category, and let's name it as categories. As you know, during migration, the tables corresponding to these two properties will be named as we have provided here, transactions and categories. Now through this constructor, we have to pass the DB provider that we are going to use, whether it is SQL Server or MySQL, etc., and the corresponding DB connection string. So here we have the constructor parameter DB context options.
as options. Now we have to pass the same parameter options to the base class, which is here db context. As you know, the instance of this application db context will be created through dependency injection. So that we can do inside this program.cs file here. So here we have the dependency injection. For that, we just need to do this builder.services. So here we have the builder object. For adding each services into it, we are calling this collection of iService collections. From that, we just need to call this function add db context, which is of the type application db context that we have just created. Let's add the using statement here. Now into this function, we have to pass the value for the constructor parameter. So here we have the lambda expression with this parameter options. We just need to do this options dot use SQL server function can be called. So by calling this function, we are telling that we are going to use SQL Server DB. Now in order to use this function, we have to use this namespace here, entity framework core. Into this, we have to pass the connection string for the DB that we are going to use. That we can do inside this app settings.json file. For that, we could do this. Here we have the connection string. Inside that, we will provide a connection string with a name dev connection. So first of all, we have the server, then database, and then we are using the local authentication. So I will set this trusted connection as true. In order to execute multiple query batches at a time, we can set this property multiple active result sets. Now let's provide the SQL Server instance name. Now let's provide a DB name. It will be transaction DB. So far there is no DB with this name transaction DB. It will be created during the migration. So here we have the DB connection string. Now back to program.cs file. Now into this function, we have to pass the DB connection string that we have saved inside this file. For that, we can use the same object builder. Inside that, we have this configuration property. From that, we can call this function get connection string. Now into this, we have to pass the name of the connection string that we have provided here. So let me copy paste this name. So everything is set for the DB migration. Now before doing the actual DB migration, let me open my management studio. Let's connect with the SQL Server instance here. Now there is no database with the name transaction DB. Now let's do the DB migration. For that, first of all, we have to build this project. After successful build, open package manager console. In my case, it is already here at the bottom. If you can't see this package manager here, select project from the solution explorer, then go to tools, then NuGet package manager, then package manager console. Now first of all, we need to create a migration. For that, we could do this add migration, and let's provide a name. I will name it as initial create. Hit enter. As a result of this command execution, there will be a new folder migrations. Within that, we have a C# file with the migration name initial create. It contains the C# code for creating the SQL Server DB or tables with the models that we have here. Okay. Now to create the physical DB according to the models, we have to execute one more command, update database. Hit enter. In order to verify whether this migration went successful or not, you can go to the management studio here and let's refresh this databases node. So here we have the new DB transaction DB. Let's expand these tables here. Now you could see the tables corresponding to the models that we have created, categories and transaction. Let's check their design. As you can see, each of these columns are created as per the model that we have inside this ASP.NET project here. See, all of these properties are converted to corresponding SQL Server table columns. Now, in order to verify whether we have created a foreign key corresponding to this category ID here, for that you can expand this transactions here and let's expand these keys, and here we have the foreign key. Now there is one thing you should know. The foreign key that we have created is of the type cascade delete. So whenever a category record is deleted from here, the corresponding records with that specific category ID will be deleted from this table also. That's what we meant by cascade delete. Not vice versa, meaning when we delete a transaction record here, corresponding category ID record from this table is not get deleted. It only happens when we delete records from this primary table categories here. Now back to the project. Now let me close all of the tabs except this categories model here. Now I'm going to create a controller for the category in order to implement the CRUD operations for this entity. So Solution Explorer, right click, then add controller. From this left panel, we have selected controller under MVC and select this template here, MVC controller with views using entity framework. Now for this controller, category will be the model, and here we have the DB context, application DB context. Now we have selected all of these options here. Now I will name this controller as category controller. Click on add. You might get errors like this during the creation of the first controller inside a new MVC project. This error here is because of version conflicts in install and NuGet packages. So in order to fix it, first of all, let's close all open windows related to creating the controller. For some of you, you might be able to successfully create your MVC controller. If you are having struggles to create your first controller because of the errors that we have just seen, you can go to manage and NuGet packages, then go to this tab here, updates, select all of these packages and go for the update. After successful update, back to Solution Explorer. Let's try to create the controller again. Controller name will be category controller. Click on add. Finally, as a result of the scaffolding mechanism, here we have the controller category. You can see various action methods for the CRUD operation of the type get and post. We don't need all of them, we will get into that in a bit. Now inside this controller, here we have the constructor of the controller, and it is having this parameter of the type DB context. So the value of this DB context, as I mentioned in all of my previous videos, the value of this DB context class instance will be passed from the dependency injection in ASP.NET Core. It will be assigned to the private property here underscore context. Now in rest of the action methods, in order to interact with the DB, this private property is used. Now let's run this application without debug mode. For that, you can click on this run icon here. So here we have the default view of the application. As you can see, this is the home page and this is rendered from this default controller here, home. Okay. To be specific, the index action method of home controller is rendered. So here we have the action method index and you could see the corresponding view here. Okay, index. Now you must be wondering this, why am I having this dark background here? If you have watched my previous videos, you know that I always recommend dark mode or dark background. Inside this Chrome browser here, I'm using this extension Dark Reader just to avoid the eye strains from the white screen. See? Right now, if you're watching this tutorial from a dark room, you will definitely feel the eye strains because of the white screens here. Now, in order to avoid the eye strains because of the bright screens, I always use extensions like this in my web browser, or I will be using dark themes on our editors. So hope you understood my intention here. Now let's switch back to the dark mode. As we go forward, we'll be using custom CSS to make the background darker without the extension here, okay? Now, as we all know, the default routing of this application is configured inside this program.cs file here. So first of all, we have the controller name, then action name, then if there is any query parameter, that will be considered as the ID here. So by default, it is home, then index will be the default action name. So that's what we have here. Everything is by default value, home, then action. Now let's navigate the index action method of this category controller here. See, here we have the index action method get of the category controller. For that, we could do this category /index. Now as you can see, this index action method is trying to retrieve all of the records from the categories table, and which is to be displayed within this HTML table here. Okay. Now before getting into that, let's configure this project for incorporating Syncfusion components. So here is the official website, syncfusion.com. Now Syncfusion is one of the most popular name in this field of UI components. Most of you might have already heard of them. Their components are available in almost all frameworks, whether it is in web or desktop or mobile applications. And most of you could use them for free, so that's one of the reasons for including their components in this project. Now let's check what Syncfusion has for an ASP.NET Core developer. So go to products. Here you could see the ASP.NET Core. Now let's go to the demo. Now for ASP.NET Core, Syncfusion got around 70 plus components, which is more than what we need in almost all cases. So here we have a list of top Syncfusion components for an ASP.NET Core project. Now if you click on any of them, you can see their previews or demo. Now let's try this chart here. So here we have the preview of the component chart, and you could see the corresponding preview or source code which is responsible for the demo here. Okay, and thereby you can copy paste the source code here and you can customize the component as per your requirement. Now for customizing and understanding a Syncfusion component, we have Syncfusion documentation and API reference. For that, back to this demo page here, at the bottom you could see this link for documentation. So for each component available in Syncfusion, you could see a detailed explanation here how to use them and how to customize them as per the common requirement. For example, let's expand this date picker. So here we have the various discussion on this same component, and under this how to session we have various customizations of this component. And along with this documentation, here we have the API reference for each of the component available. So basically an API lists out all of the constructors, properties and methods available for a component so that you can really understand the component in depth. If you have any doubt, you can go through their forum here. So all of these necessary links are given in video description. You can go through them later. Now with that being said, let's check how to add or configure our ASP.NET Core MVC project to include these Syncfusion components. So here we have the Syncfusion documentation. Now first of all, we have to install the required NuGet packages for the components. So here we have the core package, which is EJ to ASP.NET Core. And along with that, we have to install these two dependency packages. Below that, we have various sub packages. It will be necessary based on your requirement. For example, if you want to work with spreadsheet, you have to install this package. Or if you want to work with Word, you can install this package here. Like that, we have various sub packages here. For this project, for our project, we only need this core package here. So let me copy this package name from here and back to the project. And let's try to install this in NuGet package. So here we are within this browse tab. Now let's search the package here. So here it is. Let's install this latest stable version. So here we have successfully installed the core package. Along with that, I hope these dependencies will be installed. Now we have to configure this MVC project as mentioned inside this getting started session here. So go to this session here, tag helpers in ASP.NET Core MVC. Now first of all, we have to import the Syncfusion tag helper to view imports.cshtml. So let me copy this back to the project and pasting here inside this views view imports. So here it is. Now we have to add this start sheet reference to the default layout page. So here we have the layout page under shared folder. We have to paste that inside this head tag here, just above this site.css. I will tell you why. The start sheet that we have inside this head tag is rendered in the same order as we have given here. Now this start sheet site.css is a global start sheet in any MVC project where we can add our custom CSS. Now the reason for keeping this start sheet at the bottom is that we can override the start rules defined in above start sheets here. Okay. Now back to the documentation, we are almost done. Now we have to add a script reference like we have done with the start sheet. Let me copy this and we have to paste that just above the head end tag as you can see here. So here we go. Now finally we have to register the Syncfusion script manager with this script tag here. For that we just need to copy paste this tag just above the body end tag. So here we have the body end tag. So I will paste it here. Now we can use the Syncfusion components simply like this calendar tag here. The only thing that we have left here, the Syncfusion licensing. I will show you how to get a free community license from Syncfusion in a bit. That I will show you in next part while designing the category 4. For more awesome videos like this, please consider subscribing to this channel Code Affection if you haven't yet. If you found this video helpful, please like and share this video with your friends and colleagues.